Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love are told. If you enjoy stories like this, go ahead and like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe. When Ethan and I bought our first home together, I was brimming with excitement. I had poured my heart into every corner of the house, from the curtains that softened the sunlight in the living room to the cozy guest suite I prepared especially for my aging parents. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours, and it symbolized the beginning of a chapter one thought would be filled with mutual respect, laughter, and unity. I envisioned the housewarming party as an intimate gathering where both families could feel the warmth of our new start. But from the very first day, I realized Margaret and Charles, Ethan's parents, had different plans. They arrived uninvited 2 days before the party, stepping into our home as if it were their own. Margaret's eyes swept across the living room with disapproval. "This won't do," she muttered, tugging at the delicate floral centerpiece I had arranged. "We'll need something grander, something that speaks of prestige." Before I could respond, Charles clapped Ethan on the back and announced they had already arranged for professional caterers, a valet service, and even a string quartet to perform at the event. My jaw tightened, but Ethan only smiled, basking in their approval. I had spent weeks planning a modest, warm gathering where my parents could comfortably mingle without feeling out of place. My father, battling a heart condition, needed a calm environment, and my mother, though cheerful, tired easily. But Margaret and Charles had no concern for that. They replaced my soft lighting with crystal chandeliers rented from some vendor they knew, removed my modest dining setup, and ordered tall, gold-trimmed tables that looked as though they belonged in a ballroom. I tried to speak up. "I already planned everything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The food, the seating, the music, it's all taken care of." Margaret tilted her head, her smile sharp. "Sweetheart, leave the real hosting to us. This is about Ethan's future. People of importance are coming, and we can't afford to look small." Her words cut deeper than she knew. Small. That was what she thought of me, of my family, of everything I had done to create a home, not a showcase. I looked to Ethan, silently pleading for him to back me up, but he avoided my gaze. Instead, he said, "Maybe it's best if we let them handle it. They have more experience with these things." The days leading to the party became a blur of frustration and helplessness. Strangers streamed in and out of my house, decorators, chefs, and delivery men carrying expensive flower arrangements and ice sculptures. My cozy guest suite, the one I prepared for my parents, was stripped of the quilt I had sewn for them. Margaret declared it better suited as a study or library, and began sketching ideas for its transformation. Every decision I made was swept aside, and I felt like a guest in my own home. On the morning of the housewarming, I tried to salvage what little control I had. I baked my father's favorite pie, hoping to at least place it on the dessert table as a gesture of love. When I carried it into the kitchen, I found Margaret directing the caterers like a general leading an army. She glanced at the pie, wrinkled her nose, and said, "How quaint. We'll put it aside for the staff." I stood frozen, the pie dish heavy in my hands, humiliation burning through me. It wasn't just about the pie, it was about my parents. Everything I tried to do to make them comfortable was dismissed as trivial, as though their presence didn't matter. By the time the guests arrived, the house no longer felt like mine. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the rooms as people Margaret and Charles deemed important paraded through, admiring the extravagant displays. Ethan moved among them with ease, shaking hands and nodding proudly, while I stood by the doorway, my heart aching. I scanned the room for my parents, but they hadn't arrived yet. My anxiety grew as I imagined how they would feel walking into this spectacle that bore no resemblance to the intimate celebration I promised. I wanted them to see the warmth of my home, not the cold grandeur my in-laws had plastered over it. When the doorbell finally rang, I hurried toward it, but Margaret intercepted me. "Don't worry, dear," she said. "We've hired attendants to handle the entrance. You should be mingling." Her words left me unsettled, but before I could insist, another wave of guests swept her away. I told myself my parents would be fine, that they would be welcomed. Still, a knot of unease twisted in my stomach. As the night wore on, the party became louder, more chaotic. The string quartet played so forcefully I could barely hear myself think. Ethan laughed with his parents near the bar, while I lingered near the kitchen, unnoticed. My phone buzzed, and when I pulled it out, I saw a missed call from my mother. My heart skipped. Why would she call me if she was already inside? I dialed her back, but there was no answer. I hurried toward the front door, but the attendants were busy greeting a group of new arrivals. I asked them if my parents had come, but they shook their heads. Panic prickled through me. My father couldn't be standing outside for long in the cold night air, not with his heart condition. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, the chilly wind biting at my skin. The street was lined with luxury cars, music spilling faintly from the house behind me. But my parents were nowhere in sight. I told myself maybe they had gone back to the car. Maybe they were waiting. My steps quickened as I scanned up and down the street, dread pressing heavier with each passing second. The celebration behind me grew fainter, replaced by the sound of my own breath quickening. That was when I realized something was terribly wrong. I followed the sound of faint coughing before I saw them. My parents were sitting huddled together on the small stone bench just outside the side gate, half hidden from the flood of guests coming through the front. My mother's scarf was pulled tight over her head, her hands trembling as she rubbed my father's arms. And my father, oh God, his lips were tinged with blue, his chest heaving shallowly with each breath. My heart stopped cold. Dad! I cried, rushing to him. My mother's eyes met mine, wide and desperate. We've been out here for nearly an hour, she whispered. They wouldn't let us in. The words seared into me like fire. My own parents, my gentle, aging parents who came only to celebrate my happiness, had been locked out while strangers feasted in the warmth of my home. My father tried to smile at me through his pain. We didn't want to cause trouble, Emma, he wheezed. But it's cold. Very cold. My hands shook as I pulled my coat tighter around him, wrapping it across his chest. Rage and disbelief crashed inside me. Who did this? I demanded, though deep down I already knew. Margaret and Charles. Of course it was them. They were so consumed with appearances, so determined to control everything, that my parents' dignity and health meant nothing to them. I tried to help my father up, but his legs buckled under him. My mother clutched his arm, her face pale with panic. He needs warmth now, she said, her voice breaking. I shouted for one of the attendants, but none of them moved to help. They looked at me as though unsure of what to do. I realized then they weren't here for me. They worked for my in-laws, not for the woman who actually lived in the house. I clenched my teeth and half dragged my father toward the front door. Step aside. I snapped at the attendants, but they hesitated. Didn't Margaret say one began, and that was enough? This is my house, I hissed, my voice trembling with fury. And this is my father. You will move, or I will call the police right now. They stumbled back, and I hauled my father inside. The warmth of the foyer hit us, but it was already too late to undo the damage of the bitter night air. My father slumped heavily in the chair I pulled forward, his breathing shallow, his face gray. My mother held his hand, whispering prayers under her breath. Guests turned to look at us, their smiles faltering as whispers rippled through the room. Margaret appeared then, her wine glass poised elegantly in her hand. Her eyes narrowed as she saw my parents, disheveled and shaking. What on earth is going on? She demanded. I rounded on her, trembling with rage. They were locked outside, in the cold, for an hour. My father can barely breathe. Her expression didn't shift, not even with shame. Instead, she glanced at the guests and forced a laugh. Oh, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. The attendants must have been confused. Confused? I spat. Confused enough to leave an elderly man with a heart condition freezing outside while you drank champagne in here? Charles joined her, his voice booming over the murmurs. Keep your voice down, Emma. You're embarrassing yourself. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their expensive shoes clicking against my floors as they looked anywhere but at me. Ethan finally appeared, his face flushed, whether from drink or embarrassment I couldn't tell. Emma, what's happening? I stared at him, waiting for him to defend us, to defend my parents, but he only glanced at his mother and father, then back at me, caught in the middle. His silence tore through me more than his parents' cruelty ever could. Call an ambulance, I ordered, my voice breaking. Now. No one moved. Not Ethan, not Margaret, not Charles. I pulled my phone from my pocket with shaking hands and dialed emergency services myself, kneeling beside my father as my mother stroked his forehead, tears streaking her cheeks. The paramedics arrived swiftly, pushing through the throng of overdressed guests, who whispered as though this was just another form of entertainment. They carried my father out on a stretcher, an oxygen mask pressed over his face, and I followed close behind, refusing to let him out of my sight. My mother clung to my arm as we climbed into the ambulance. I glanced back once through the open doors of my house. Margaret stood there, arms crossed, her lips pursed in irritation. Charles whispered something in her ear, and Ethan just stood frozen in the doorway watching me leave. At the hospital, I sat beside my father's bed, my mother curled in a chair nearby. The sterile lights flickered above us as the machines beeped steadily, monitoring his fragile heart. Guilt weighed down on me until it was hard to breathe. I had invited them into this mess. I had promised them a home where they would always be welcome, yet I had failed to protect them from humiliation and harm. When Ethan finally arrived at the hospital hours later, I was numb with exhaustion and rage. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled it back. "Don't," I whispered. "Emma, I didn't know. You didn't care." I cut in, my voice sharp and bitter. "You stood by while they stripped me of my home, of my plans, of my dignity. And now my father is lying in a hospital bed because of your parents' arrogance." He flinched, his shoulders slumping. "I never thought it would go this far." "That's the problem," I said. "You never thought about me. Or my parents. Only them." The truth hung heavy between us, undeniable. For the first time I saw the crack in the perfect picture I had painted of our marriage. And I realized that what happened wasn't just a mistake, it was a revelation. I stayed by my father's side through the night, listening to the rhythm of the heart monitor, letting the anger inside me sharpen into resolve. This wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning of something else. Something they never expected. Because if Margaret and Charles thought they could humiliate me, strip away my voice, and endanger the people I loved without consequence, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The morning after my father's medical scare, I returned to my house with a fire in my chest that no one could put out. The silence inside the place felt different. It wasn't home anymore, it was a battlefield. The decorations from the night before were still scattered across the rooms. Empty glasses littered the counters, half-wilted flowers drooped from tall golden vases, and the scent of expensive perfume clung to the air like a bitter aftertaste. My home had been violated, not only by strangers, but by people who claimed to be family. I walked into the guest suite, the one I had lovingly prepared for my parents, and stopped dead in my tracks. The quilt I had made was folded into a corner, tossed aside like trash. New blueprints lay on the dresser, labeled library conversion, with Margaret's handwriting scrawled across the margins. That was when I noticed something else, a receipt. I picked it up, my eyes narrowing as I scanned the numbers. It wasn't just a library they were planning, it was renovations worth thousands of dollars. And the payment? It had been made from my joint account with Ethan. My pulse pounded in my ears. I rushed to my laptop and logged into our bank account. The numbers on the screen confirmed my worst fear. Ethan had withdrawn a huge sum, more than I ever imagined he would take without even telling me. My chest ached as I realized the truth that my husband had used our money to fund a party I never wanted, to pay for changes I never approved, and to please parents who saw me as nothing but an obstacle. The betrayal twisted inside me until it hardened into resolve. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. I explained everything about how the house was purchased jointly, how the funds were being misused, and how my in-laws had staged a takeover of my home. The lawyer listened calmly and then said words that steadied me. "You have more power here than you think. Start documenting everything." So I did. I took photos of the unauthorized renovations, the receipts, the party debris still littering the house. I even recorded a video, narrating what had happened and pointing out the plans for the guest suite that had been hijacked from my parents. My lawyer connected me with a financial advisor, and together we began the process of separating my finances, protecting what I could before more damage was done. That evening, Ethan came home. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with guilt. He tried to speak, but I stopped him. "Sit down," I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. He sat at the dining table, the one that had been pushed into a corner to make space for his parents' grand displays. I placed the receipt in front of him. "What is this?" I demanded. He lowered his gaze. I thought it would impress them. I thought. You thought nothing about me. Or my parents. Do you know my father could have died out there? Do you even care? His eyes filled with tears, but I was beyond the point of sympathy. You stole from me, Ethan. From us. And you let them humiliate me in my own home. He whispered. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. I replied coldly. And now you will fix it. The days that followed were a storm of confrontation. With my lawyer present, I demanded restitution. Margaret and Charles were livid when they realized I had locked them out of any further involvement. I changed the locks on the house, installed security cameras, and made it clear. This was my home, not theirs. If they ever tried to force their way in again, I would press charges. Margaret sneered when I told her. You ungrateful little girl. Do you know what you're giving up? Our connections, our name. I don't need your name. I cut in, my voice firm. I have my own. And unlike you, I know how to protect it. Charles tried intimidation, threatening to pull Ethan from the family business, to cut us off financially. I looked him in the eye and said, do it. Because I would rather live with nothing than live under your control. Ethan sat in silence through it all, shame written across his face. He knew now that there was no hiding from the truth. Either he stood with me, or he would stand alone. For once he chose me. He began counseling on his own, admitting how deeply he had allowed his parents to rule his life. It wasn't an easy fix, it would never be, but it was a start. For me, the healing began with reclaiming my space. I restored the guest suite exactly as it was meant to be, putting the quilt back on the bed, placing flowers on the nightstand. When my parents came to visit again, I made sure they were welcomed with warmth and dignity. My father, though weaker, smiled as he lay under that quilt, and my mother hugged me tightly. You've grown stronger, she whispered. Stronger than they ever expected. And she was right, because through this ordeal, I learned something vital. Family is not about blood or status or control. Family is about respect, love, and care. Margaret and Charles may never understand that, but I did. And I vowed never to let anyone take it from me again. Even though my marriage with Ethan remained fragile, I held the power now. He knew that if he ever chose his parents' pride over my dignity again, there would be no second chances. My parents deserved better, and so did I. When I looked back at that night, I found my parents with blue lips, shivering while my in-laws partied inside. I felt the rage still, but I also felt the triumph. Because I made them pay. Not with money alone, but with the one thing they valued most, control. They lost it and I reclaimed it. And in that moment I finally understood what it meant to stand my ground. Moral lesson. At the end of everything, here is the truth I carry with me and now share with you. Never allow anyone to silence you in your own life. Boundaries are not walls to shut out love. They are gates to protect it. The people who truly respect you will honor those gates. The ones who don't will expose themselves as intruders. I learned the hard way, but I learned all the same. So if you are listening to this story today, let it remind you to guard your dignity, your peace, and the people you love most fiercely. You are stronger than you think, and sometimes it takes betrayal to uncover just how much strength you already have. Hello guys, if you found my story powerful, please like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love. And please drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know the lessons you took away.